I figure since it's been a couple weeks, and when we did go through chapter 7, not all of us were here, maybe we could do a quick review to get us back up to speed again. So chapter 7, we actually went through the first 9 verses of chapter 7 the last time we were together. And let's go ahead and just read those verses, and then we'll do a bit of a recap on that. So, and it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up towards Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim. And his heart was moved, and the heart of his people as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind. Then said the Lord unto Isaiah, Go forth now and meet Ahaz, thou and Shear-Jashub thy son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. And say unto him, Take heed and be quiet, fear not, neither be faint-hearted, for the 2 tails of these smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin in Syria, and of the son of Remaliah, or Remaliah, however you would want to pronounce that. Because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah hath taken evil counsel against thee, saying, Let us go up against Judah and vex it. Let us make a breach therein for us, and set a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabiel. Thus saith the Lord God, It shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. And within 65 years all Ephraim be broken, that it be not a people. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son. If ye will not believe, surely ye shall not be established. So those are the verses that we went through last time, and we'll do a quick review on that. But before we do that, for those not here in the first class, or maybe you don't remember, the next several chapters we're going to be going through prophecies. Chapter 7, Isaiah's encounter with King Ahaz, is going to lead into an announcement of a child, Emmanuel. In chapter 8, it tells of the fall of Syria and Israel, while also giving assurance that a remnant would be saved. Chapter 9 is going to talk about the divine Prince of Peace as promised. Chapter 10, Assyria is named as God's instrument of punishment, with more assurances that a remnant would be rescued. And then chapter 11, we have mention of the righteous branch. And then chapter 12 is going to be a hymn of thanksgiving for salvation. So through the next several chapters, we're going to be touching on some prophecies dealing with the Messiah that would come in the far distant future of Isaiah's day. So one of the things that we touched on is some key players that are mentioned here. And in verse 1 it says, And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham. So we got to keep in mind Ahaz is in that southern kingdom of Judah. He's the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah. So Ahaz is a key player here that we're talking about. And then we have Rezin. the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel. So Pekah, the king of Israel, which is that northern kingdom. Then we have Rezin, the king of Syria. And basically what they had was, you had Tiglath-Pileser III. He was the king of Assyria. So Assyria was becoming a powerhouse. They were the ones who were, during this time period, going around trying to conquer as much land as they could so that they could grow bigger and more powerful. Well, Pekah and Rezin, they were pretty scared of that, and they see the writing on the wall, and they want to do something about it. So they formed an alliance between the two of them, but Ahaz was having nothing to do with it. So Pekah and Rezin were trying to persuade Ahaz to join them. Well, he didn't want to. So they got upset, and what they were going to do is, together they formed an alliance, and they were going to go into Judah and basically bully Ahaz and forcing him to join them. And if they're not successful in doing that, in verse 6 it says, let us come up against Judah and vex it. Let us make a breach therein for us, and set a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabiel. So what they were wanting to do is, if they had no success with Ahaz, they wanted to try to dethrone Ahaz and put somebody else in his position that they maybe could persuade to join them in forces against this king of Assyria. Well, what ends up happening is, Ahaz decides, instead of putting his faith in God, as Isaiah was trying to tell him he needs to do, Ahaz decides that he's going to pay Tiglath-Pileser, the very person who's coming down into the lands to try to conquer everything. He's going to pay Tiglath-Pileser money to basically protect him and go up against Pekah and Rezin. Well, when Ahaz did that, God was not happy. Basically, Ahaz is choosing to put his faith and protection in a man instead of his faith and protection and relying on God. So we see all of this transpiring in these first 9 verses here. And that's the reason why Isaiah is being sent to Ahaz, is to try to explain to him and persuade him, don't do this. You do not need to put your faith in this king of Assyria. No good's going to come out of that. Nothing successful is going to come out of that. And we're going to see here in a little bit that basically Isaiah is going to give Ahaz a sign to show him that these two kings, Pekah and Rezin, they're not going to be successful. So why are you fearing them so much that you're refusing the Lord's help? And let's see here. So speaking of Pekah and Rezin brought their armies to Jerusalem, we do have, and we went through some references, and we have a lot of this recorded in the book of Kings, in which in 2 Kings chapter 16, in verse 5, we have the very account being talked about during Ahaz's reign. And 2 Kings chapter 16 verse 5, it's recorded, then Rezin the king of Syria and Pekah the son of Remaliah king of Israel came up to Jerusalem to war. And they besieged Ahaz, but could not overcome him. So all of this is recorded in Chronicles. It's recorded in 2 Kings. We have it mentioned here in Isaiah. It's recorded in secular history of all these events taking place. So everything's tying in together here. So basically Ahaz, out of desperation, he's going to hire Tiglath-Pileser, this very guy who's trying to conquer their lands. And that displeased God. So let's see here if we can pick up with where we left off. So that was a very brief recap of verses 1 through 9 as to some background of what's happening with these individuals that are being mentioned, of what's happening with the entire nation and what's happening in the world during that time, with the Assyrian Empire becoming the powerhouse. And now we're going to move into verse 10 and through verses 17, and here we're going to have the sign of the Lord that's going to be revealed. So, in verses 10 through 17 it says, Moreover the king spake again unto Ahaz, saying, Ask thee a sign of the Lord thy God, ask it either in the depth or in the height above. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord. And he said, Hear ye now, O house of David. Is it a small thing for you to weary men, but will ye weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. And it says, Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Butter and honey shall he eat, and that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her and the kings. And then in verse 17 it says, The Lord shall bring upon thee and upon thy people and upon thy father's house days that have not come from the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Assyria. So, we're talking about a sign here in verse 10. Moreover, the Lord spake again unto Ahaz, saying. So, when we go into the New Testament, we can learn a little bit about signs and prophecies in 2 Peter 1:20. It says, Knowing this first, that no prophecy of the Scripture is of any private interpretation. For the prophecy came not in old time by the will of man, but holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Ghost. So here we are getting ready to view a prophecy, and the prophecy Isaiah is about to reveal came directly from God. And we see that in verse 10, Moreover, the Lord spake. So Isaiah is the mouthpiece. He's speaking on behalf of the Lord, and he's giving this prophecy that God wanted revealed. And he says, Ask thee a sign of the Lord thy God. Now he's talking to Ahaz. Ask thee a sign. Ask it either in depth or in height above. And Ahaz says, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord. So, at first glance, the first thing that stands out in your mind is, okay, well, Ahaz didn't want to tempt the Lord. So how is that a bad thing? And then on the other sense, you're reading it and you're saying, well, Isaiah is just flat out telling them, ask thee a sign of the Lord. So why would Isaiah try to set them up? So it wouldn't make any sense. So just as a thought process here, a thinking process, would you say that Ahaz's response was based upon faithfulness? And basically what we're viewing here, we're viewing all the events that are happening that's built up to this point We're looking at the events that Ahaz has put himself through, the things that he's trying to get set up on his own for his own protection. And when I was reading this, I had to ask myself that question, was he truly not wanting to tempt the Lord, or was there another agenda to this on Ahaz's part? And basically, when I look at everything, Ahaz had already determined the course that he was going to go on. And that course was going to be, he was going to put his faith in the king of Assyria instead of God. And we do have recording of this. So Isaiah is saying, ask a sign, and Ahaz is saying, I'm not going to tempt the Lord. Ahaz already made his mind up. He knew the course he was going to go. He felt confident that his decision was going to protect him and his people. And Isaiah is going to try to explain, look, you got this all wrong. You can't be putting your faith in a man. You need to come back and put your faith in God. In 2 Kings 16, starting at verse 7, it has it recorded, Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, Ahaz says, King of Assyria, I am thy servant and thy son. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Syria and out of the hand of the king of Israel, which rise up against me. And Ahaz took the silver and the gold that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it for a present to the king of Assyria. Ahaz already had his mind made up of what he wanted to do. Ahaz had a lack of faith in the Lord being able to protect him. So when you read this verse 12 and you see, well, Ahaz must have been a godly man. He did not want to tempt the Lord. Well, that's a little misleading, because Ahaz was already headed down the path of not putting his faith in God. And we see that we have that recorded in 2 Kings. He's telling the king of Assyria, I'm thy servant and thy son. So Ahaz did not ask, because Ahaz did not trust, and he did not believe the Lord could protect him. So he took it into his own hands. So after that, in verse 13, and he said, Hear ye now, O house of David. So Isaiah is continuing his conversation here. Hear ye now, O house of David. Is it a small thing for you to weary men? But will ye weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings. So Isaiah went ahead and told them what the prophecy and the sign was. So a question would be, when we're looking at these Old Testament prophecies, and we take something of this very instance, to where this prophecy is being told to Ahaz, what importance comes from Ahaz being told this prophecy? When you think of who Ahaz is, when you think of the kingdom that he represents, when you think of the current circumstances of these two kings that's going against them, and then you also have the mentioning of a virgin shall conceive and bear a son and call his name Emmanuel, you have to slow down and ask yourself, what great significance and importance is coming from telling Ahaz about this prophecy? And I know it may be a little deep to just spring that on you all of a sudden.
I put Michigan, I looked up about the butter and honey. That's when they had a famine in the land, and God cursed the ground. And all they had to eat was butter and honey, because he whistled for the bees, and the cattle was the only thing that was left. The ground wasn't growing anything.
Okay. And all that moves into, actually all that's going to move right into the very next chapter of the land being destroyed.
It's going to be a great famine and stuff.
Yeah, the land is going to be destroyed, okay? So when we view these prophecies, we see almost a two-part situation here. We see something that's going to happen well in the future, and then we're also seeing some things that are going to happen within that time frame that they're still alive. So we have a prophecy that's covering, I guess, short-term events and then long-term out in the future events. So, telling Ahaz this was basically trying to get Ahaz to put his trust in God. He had gotten off base at some point in time, and they're trying to get him back on course. The prophecy would have encouraged Ahaz to trust in God, because in a short period of time, the two kings that he's fearing, they're not going to be an issue anymore for him. They're not going to succeed. And Isaiah is going to try to explain that to him. As far as the virgin birth being part of the sign, to fully grasp that, being such a future event, maybe he didn't understand that fully, but even the talk of the virgin birth and Emmanuel that's going to come on the scene, that's also going to be a sign for Ahaz to put his trust in God and know that God is going to protect his people. And Ahaz would have known some signs anyway about the seed that's mentioned back with Abraham. So they knew something, but they didn't know the details in it all. And Isaiah is given assurance of, look, God's not going to neglect his people. He's going to be there. You need to trust in God, and if you don't, whatever schemes you have up your sleeve, they're not going to be successful if God's not a part of it. It was a sign for a distant day that the Messiah would be born of a virgin. And we have it recorded in Matthew chapter 1. It says, "Now all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Behold, a virgin shall be with a child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God with us." So, jumping many years into the future, we see it recorded that it did indeed happen, of the prophecies that were told in the Old Testament. Emmanuel means God is with us. So we have this prophecy laid out, and in verses 15 and 16 it says, "Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good." Verse 16, "For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings." So, Isaiah has told Ahaz, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken for both her kings. So, this gives an indication here of an immediate fulfillment in a short period of time. So these verses also point forward to Jesus in a very distant future. So we have a lot of things happening here in this prophecy and in these very short amount of verses. We have the Christ, the Messiah, being prophesied about. We have assurance for Ahaz of the kings that he's fearing and stressing over. And all of this is for encouragement and assurance that God is going to take care of everything. Put your trust in God. Verse 17, the Lord shall bring upon thee, and upon thy people, and upon thy father's house, days that have not come from the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Assyria. So, the very help that Ahaz would seek from Assyria is going to end up backfiring on him. And Isaiah is trying to explain all this to him in their meeting, that when they gathered together to talk. It's going to backfire. Put your trust in God. And that's exactly what happens every time man puts his trust in another man instead of God. It's always going to backfire. Man will let us down. It will never fail. Man will let us down. We will let each other down, which is why we need to be trusting in God and not another man. Ahaz trusted in his own wisdom, kind of like Nebuchadnezzar did. Nebuchadnezzar got the big head. He started trusting in his own wisdom. He didn't want to give God any credit. Ahaz got the big head. He knows it all. In his mind, I don't need God. I've got this figured out. I can see how powerful this Assyrian army is, and they're going to come down and they're going to protect me and take care of me. Not the case. Verse 18 says, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall hiss for the fly that is in the uttermost part of the rivers of Egypt, and for a bee that is in the land of Assyria. They shall come and shall rest, all of them, in the desolate valleys, and in the holes of the rocks, and upon all thorns, and upon all bushes. In the same day shall the Lord shave with a razor that is hired, namely, by them beyond the river, by the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the feet. It shall also consume the beard. And it shall come to pass in that day that a man shall nourish a young cow and 2 sheep, and it shall come to pass for an abundance of milk. He shall give, he shall eat butter. Let me reread that. The abundance of milk that they shall give, he shall eat butter. There. For butter and honey shall everyone eat that is left in the land. And it shall come to pass in that day that every place shall be where there were 1,000 vines and 1,000 silverlings, it shall even be for briars and thorns. With arrows and with bows shall men come thither, because all the land shall become briars and thorns. And all the hills that shall be digged with the mattock, there shall not come thither the fear of briars and thorns, but it shall be for the sending forth of oxen and for the treading of lesser cattle. So what we have here in this last section of verses, you'll notice 4 things that I've got highlighted here. And basically what we have is, we have 4 consequences of making an alliance with Assyria. So we have 4 warnings being described to Ahaz when you do not put your faith in the Lord, and you decide to put your faith into the king of Assyria, Ahaz. There's consequences for this if you refuse the Lord's help. So, Isaiah refers to Judah's so-called allies here. Verse 18, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall hiss for the fly that is in the uttermost parts of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. They shall come and shall rest all of them in the desolate valleys, and in the holes of the rocks, and upon all the thorns, and upon all the bushes. So these unreliable allies that Ahaz has decided that he's putting his faith in, they're being described and compared to the swarming of these insects, the inescapable characteristics that they're portraying. And Clark, just a little bit ago, you brought up the insects, didn't you?
Yeah.
I didn't know if you were wanting to go any more in depth than that or not.
I was just going to say the bees is where they be getting honey to eat, and the cows is where they get their butter.
Yep.
So that's all that's going to be left after the gravel won't produce nothing.
Yep.
The one that owns and bushes left.
Yep.
It's like weeds in a garden. If you let the weeds to the garden over, it won't produce nothing.
That's right. That's right. And that was going to be the consequences of rejecting God's help and putting your faith in man. Verse 20, it says, "In the same day shall the Lord shave with a razor that is hired, namely by them beyond the river, by the king of Assyria, the head, and the hair of the feet, and it shall also consume the beard." A razor that is hired beyond the river, basically alliances with other nations. Isaiah announced that a price would be paid for forming ungodly alliances. And that is exactly what Ahaz is guilty of doing. An ungodly alliance to where he was paying this nation in Assyria, the king, to come down and try to protect him against Rezin and Pekah, his northern neighbors. The figure of shaving would express a disgrace that would come on Judah because they had formed an alliance with the Assyrians, an ungodly alliance with a heathen nation. Verses 21 and 22 says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that a man shall nourish a young cow and 2 sheep. And it shall come to pass for the abundance of milk that they shall give he..." Okay, this is the one I messed up before. "For the abundance of milk that they shall give, he shall eat butter. For butter and honey shall everyone eat that is left in the land." So, the farming activity would disappear because of the destruction of the land, and we'll get into more details on that in the very next chapter, chapter 8. Very few people were left. That they only had these natural products left to eat. Exactly what Clark was telling us a little bit ago. They were going to be left with bare minimum. The land was not going to be in good shape. And all of this is because of rejecting the help of God and putting your faith in your own wisdom and making ungodly alliances with other nations. So Isaiah is laying out all the consequences here to Ahaz. And then the chapter ends by saying, "And it shall come to pass in that day that every place shall be where there were 1,000 vines as 1,000 silverlings. It shall even be for briars and thorns. With arrows and with bows shall men come thither, because all the land shall become briars and thorns. And on all the hills that shall be digged with a mattock, there shall not come thither the fear of briars and thorns, but it shall be for the sending forth of oxen and for the treading of lesser cattle." So, these verses are a reference to the Song of the Vineyard, if you remember. back in Isaiah chapter 5, 1 through 7 that we went through. Lack of faith and obedience to the Lord destroys both the land and the people. And real quickly, we'll just go back and we'll just look at these verses. And chapter 5, 1 through 7, if you guys remember, it says, "Now will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. And he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof. He planted it with the choicest of the vine, built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress therein. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, brought it forth wild grapes. And now go to, I will tell you that I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up, break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. I will lay it to waste. It shall not be pruned nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds, they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry." So, in the next chapter, we'll get into a little more detail as far as the destruction of the land that they're going to face as consequences for not putting their faith in God. And I'm actually going to call it quits on this chapter. Is there any questions or comments, or do I need to go back and recap some of that earlier stuff that maybe not everybody heard? If there's nothing, then we'll end class and have a bit of a break before 11 o'clock.